a successful businessman torn between guilt and desire, faces the consequences of abandoning his wife after a tragic accident. Years later, when a chance reunion brings them face to face, he must confront the painful truth. Has he lost everything that truly mattered, or is there still a chance for redemption? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Michael Hughes was a man who had it all: wealth, power, and a picture-perfect life. At 40, he was at the height of his career, managing one of the most successful investment firms in Beverly Hills. He had a wife, Claire, whom he had married 6 years earlier, and a life that many would envy. But beneath the surface, the cracks in their relationship were beginning to show, and Michael was too consumed by his ambition to see it. Claire, on the other hand, was everything Michael needed when they first met. Calm, supportive, and loving, they had met at a mutual friend's party, and what started as a casual conversation about art and books soon blossomed into something more. Claire was a thoughtful woman who had always put others first, but she was also driven by her own passions. Michael had been drawn to her intelligence, her sense of humor, and the way she seemed to understand him in a way no one else did. For the first few years of their marriage, things had been easy. Claire had her career in education, and Michael had his work in finance. They were partners, supporting each other's dreams and goals. But as time went on, their lives started to diverge. Michael's ambition grew, and with it came an overwhelming focus on work. His days were filled with meetings, client calls, and making deals that made him more successful but also more distant. Claire had always been understanding of Michael's demanding job, but when they started trying for a family, things began to change. Claire had been struggling with infertility for years, and after many failed attempts, she finally found out she was pregnant. This was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter for them. The pregnancy was a surprise, but one that brought a sense of hope for Claire, who had longed for a child. She imagined a future where they would raise their child together, a new journey that would strengthen their bond. But for Michael, the news of Claire's pregnancy did not bring the joy she had hoped for. Instead, it filled him with a sense of dread. Michael's life was about control, about being in charge of every situation, and this new chapter felt like it was slipping out of his hands. Claire, in her innocence, thought that the pregnancy would bring them closer, but for Michael, it seemed to be pulling them further apart. His relationship with Claire began to feel more like a routine, a responsibility to fulfill rather than a connection to nurture. As Claire's belly grew, so did Michael's distance. He became more absorbed in his work, his nights consumed by late meetings and his weekends spent entertaining clients. The more Claire needed him, the more he withdrew, retreating into his office and his own world of financial markets. And in the quiet emptiness of their home, Claire began to feel like a stranger to him. It was during this time that Sophie Larson entered the picture. Sophie, a 30-year-old analyst at Michael's firm, was sharp, ambitious, and driven, qualities that Michael admired. She had joined the firm 2 years ago, and it didn't take long for Michael to notice her confidence and intelligence. Their professional relationship was initially respectful, with Michael seeing in Sophie the same drive and hunger for success that had once fueled him. But over time, their interactions began to shift. What started as casual conversations about work turned into longer lunches, late-night office discussions, and eventually something more. Sophie was bold in ways that Claire had never been. She challenged Michael's ideas, pushed him to think in new ways, and made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Their connection, though intellectual at first, soon became more personal, and Michael found himself drawn to her. It was a simple kiss that changed everything. One late evening, after a long day of meetings, Michael and Sophie found themselves alone in the office. One moment, they were discussing financial strategies. The next, Sophie's hand was on his, her lips meeting his, in a kiss that was both unexpected and electric. Michael's heart raced as the guilt hit him, but at the same time something inside him sparked. Sophie made him feel wanted in a way Claire no longer did. From that moment on, their affair deepened. Michael tried to push his guilt aside, convincing himself that it was just a temporary escape, a way to feel desired again. He told himself that he loved Claire but had lost the spark they once shared. With Sophie, the tension that had built up in him for years was released. She was everything Claire was not. Bold, exciting, and free from the weight of their shared history. Michael became addicted to the rush of their secret meetings and the thrill of being wanted in a way that made him feel alive. As Michael's affair with Sophie continued, Claire remained blissfully unaware. She was busy preparing for their child, decorating the nursery and planning for the future. She had no idea that Michael had already started to mentally check out of their marriage. For Claire, this pregnancy was a dream come true, a chance to finally have the family she had always wanted. But Michael, despite his outward commitment, was no longer a part of the dream. The tipping point came one winter night when Claire, heavily pregnant and on her way to a routine appointment, was involved in a serious car accident. She was rushed to the hospital, unconscious and critically injured, with the baby's life hanging in the balance. Michael, still in the grip of his affair with Sophie, received the call about the accident but didn't rush to the hospital. He didn't cancel his plans with Sophie. He didn't even feel the panic that one might expect. His mind was already elsewhere, tangled in a web of betrayal. As Claire fought for her life, Michael's world too began to unravel. He had made a choice and now he would have to face the consequences. But at this moment it wasn't Claire he was thinking about. It was Sophie. He had built his world around his desires and now it was starting to crumble. The days following Claire's accident felt like a blur to Michael. The once bustling world of meetings, phone calls, and investments was suddenly distant and unimportant. Everything he had worked for, his empire, his success, his money, seemed meaningless when faced with the reality of Claire's condition. Yet despite the gravity of the situation, Michael found himself unable to focus on anything other than the guilt that gnawed at him. Claire was in a coma for several days, and Michael was forced to confront his own emotions. Though he visited her in the hospital, sat by her bedside, and held her hand, a part of him remained detached. He went through the motions, playing the part of the concerned husband, but inside, he felt a coldness that he couldn't shake. His mind wandered constantly back to Sophie, his escape, his obsession, the woman who had become his secret source of joy in a life that had grown increasingly empty. The guilt was overwhelming at times, but it was also easy to push aside. After all, Claire was still unconscious and Michael had responsibilities, both personal and professional. He threw himself into his work with even greater intensity, meeting clients, closing deals, and securing investments. His firm was thriving, but inside he was unraveling. Sophie was his distraction, the only thing that seemed to bring any semblance of relief from the pressure of his life. As Claire's condition stabilized and she began to regain consciousness, Michael found himself avoiding her more and more. He had never been good at dealing with emotions, and now in the face of Claire's pain and vulnerability, he had no idea how to be there for her. The distance between them grew, not just physically, but emotionally. Claire, recovering from her physical injuries, needed him more than ever, but Michael felt like a stranger in his own home. One evening, after spending a long day at work, Michael came home late, expecting to find Claire resting in bed. Instead, he found her sitting in the sunroom staring out at the garden. She was wearing one of his old sweaters, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and for a moment she looked so small, fragile and vulnerable. She glanced up as he entered and their eyes met. There was a moment of silence between them, one that felt heavy with all the words neither of them knew how to say. "You've been working a lot lately," Claire said softly, breaking the silence. Michael shifted uncomfortably, not knowing how to respond. He couldn't tell her the truth, that he was emotionally distant, that his thoughts were consumed by his affair, that he wasn't sure if he even wanted to be married to her anymore. Instead, he gave her a reassuring smile, the one that had become second nature over the years. "Just trying to stay on top of things," he replied, his voice lacking the warmth it once held. Claire studied him for a moment, as though searching for something in his face that wasn't there. She had been through so much, physically and emotionally, and she needed him now more than ever. But Michael was already slipping away. The thought of facing the reality of their marriage, of confronting his infidelity, and the betrayal he had caused was too much for him. It was easier to keep playing the role of the dutiful husband, all the while knowing that the distance between them was only growing wider. The tipping point came a few days later when Michael received an unexpected message from Sophie. He had been avoiding her calls, but her message was different. It was urgent, something that couldn't wait. "We need to talk. It's important," the message read. Michael's heart raced as he read the words. He hadn't realized how much he had come to depend on Sophie, how much he had let her become a part of his life. But as he stared at the message, a sense of dread washed over him. He knew he couldn't keep pretending. His double life, the lies, the guilt, it was all catching up to him. He didn't know how much longer he could keep up the facade, but at the same time, he couldn't bring himself to let go of Sophie. The guilt of his actions had been building, but the pull of his desire for her was stronger. He needed to make a choice. Stay in the marriage that had grown cold and distant, or pursue the relationship that had ignited something in him he thought he had lost. The decision he made that night would change everything. The following morning, Michael went to Claire's room. She was awake, sitting up in bed, her face pale but determined. It was the first time she had looked at him in weeks without that faint trace of pain in her eyes. The look of someone who was still holding on to something that wasn't coming back. "Michael," Claire said quietly, "we need to talk." Michael's stomach dropped. He had been dreading this moment for weeks, but he didn't know how to face her, how to explain the things that were eating away at him. Yet somehow, he knew this was the moment that everything would come crashing down. "About what?" he asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. He knew she had been through so much and he couldn't bring himself to admit the truth to her. "About us," Claire replied, her voice steady but filled with a sadness that pierced Michael's heart. "About what's been happening. About how you've been pulling away from me." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He wanted to say something, anything to explain himself, but the truth felt too raw, too painful to admit. He wanted to deny it, to pretend that everything was still okay, but deep down, he knew Claire could feel the truth. Their marriage was over, and it was only a matter of time before the final pieces fell into place. As Claire spoke, Michael realized something he had been avoiding for months. His actions had consequences, and he couldn't keep running from them. He had betrayed the woman who had stood by his side for years, and now there was no turning back. But what he didn't expect was that Claire, despite everything, had already started to move on. She was beginning to accept the reality of their broken marriage, and for the first time, Michael felt the weight of what he had lost. The tipping point had come, and there was no more avoiding it. Michael would have to face the consequences of his choices. But the question remained, could he find a way to redeem himself? Or had he lost everything that truly mattered? Michael spent the next few weeks in a state of confusion and guilt. Claire had asked for space, retreating into herself, and Michael had no idea how to navigate the wreckage he had caused. He tried to bury himself in work as he always had, but it no longer held the same meaning. His office felt sterile. The clients he met with seemed like distant figures, and his once pristine world of financial success began to feel like an empty shell. Every corner of his life reminded him of what he had lost, and every step forward seemed to take him further away from redemption. He couldn't escape the memories of Claire, of their better days. He remembered their early years together, the laughter, the late-night talks, the way they used to dream about the future. Now, all of that seemed like it was buried beneath a pile of mistakes. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face, the pain in her eyes, the sadness that she couldn't hide. He knew he had betrayed her in ways that words could never fully express, but it wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was the way he had let her down, emotionally, mentally, and physically. He had been absent when she needed him most, and now there was no way to turn back time. As for Sophie, she had slowly faded from his life. After Claire had confronted him, Michael had tried to keep things with Sophie going, but it felt wrong, as if the very air between them had thickened with the weight of all the lies. Sophie, too, seemed to sense the distance. She had once been the spark that had reignited something in him. But now, all he felt when he was around her was emptiness. Sophie was no longer the solution to his problems. She was just another part of the mess he had created. It was a Saturday afternoon when Michael finally made the decision to visit Claire. He had given her space, as she had requested, but the silence between them had stretched too far. He couldn't keep pretending like nothing was wrong. He needed to face her, to own up to his mistakes and perhaps, just perhaps, start the long, painful process of trying to make things right. Claire was sitting in the sunroom when he arrived. The soft, golden light of the late afternoon filtered through the windows, casting a calm glow on the room. She looked peaceful, but Michael could see the weariness in her eyes. The sadness was still there, but there was something else now. A sense of strength, as if she had begun to rebuild herself in ways that didn't involve him. And that realization hit him harder than anything else. "Claire," he said softly, standing in the doorway. She looked up from the book she had been reading, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much to say, yet no words seemed adequate. Michael took a step forward, and Claire didn't move away. She didn't greet him with warmth, but there was no anger in her eyes either. Just an unsettling calm. "How are you?" Michael asked, his voice betraying his nerves. Claire sighed, setting the book aside. "I'm getting there," she said quietly. "It's been hard, but I'm starting to find my way again." Michael's heart sank at the words. She was moving on, and he wasn't a part of it. The realization that Claire no longer needed him in the way she once had was a wake-up call. She had always been the emotional anchor of their marriage, and now she was becoming something more. A person who could stand on her own, without him. "I'm sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fix. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I've been selfish, and I've been blind to what really matters." Claire didn't immediately respond. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze steady and unwavering. Michael could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. "Michael, I don't need your apology," she said softly. "It's not that I don't appreciate it, but you can't just apologize for everything and expect it to make a difference. You left me when I needed you the most. You weren't there when I fought to survive. And then you went and found someone else." The words cut deeper than Michael expected, but they were true. He had abandoned her, not just physically but emotionally, and that, more than anything, had hurt her. He could see that now, really see it for the first time. Claire had fought to stay strong, to keep their home together even as her world fell apart, and he had been nowhere to be found. "I know," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness and I don't expect it, but I need you to understand that I've realized what I've done. It's too late to change the past, but I want you to know that I've learned. I see it now, Claire. What I've done to you, to us. I see it." Claire's expression softened slightly, but she still didn't reach for him. She had learned in the months since the accident that she didn't need him to survive. She had found a strength within herself that Michael hadn't even known was there. She had rebuilt her life. Slowly, painfully, but surely. And though she wasn't ready to forgive him, she had moved forward. "You're not the man I thought you were," Claire said quietly, her voice filled with both sadness and understanding. "But I'm not the woman I was either. I've changed, Michael, and I've learned that I can be strong on my own. I don't need you to be whole again." Michael's eyes filled with tears. He had always believed that he could control everything. His success, his career, even his relationships. But standing here, facing Claire, he realized how much he had taken for granted. He had hurt her, and no amount of wealth or success could ever undo that. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. Claire looked at him for a long moment before she stood up. "It's not about being sorry, Michael. It's about moving forward. And that's what I'm doing. I've found a new purpose in my life, and I'm going to continue building it. Without you." Michael nodded, finally understanding the depth of her words. He had been so focused on his own guilt and shame that he hadn't realized how much Claire had already begun to heal. She was no longer the woman who needed him. She was the woman who had found herself again. And for the first time, Michael felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of getting back what he had lost, but the relief of knowing Claire was going to be okay. As Michael turned to leave, he realized that this was the first step toward his own awakening. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he understood that his redemption wouldn't come from trying to fix the past. It would come from changing the way he lived in the present. And maybe, just maybe, learning to rebuild a life that was truly his own. 3 years had passed since Michael had left Claire's life. In that time, Claire had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Her foundation, focused on mental health awareness for women during pregnancy, had grown into something much larger than she had ever anticipated. It was no longer just a way to heal from her own pain. It had become her way of giving back, of finding purpose in the midst of loss. Claire had found a new sense of strength, one that didn't depend on anyone else. She had learned to rely on herself, and for the first time in years she was truly at peace. Michael, on the other hand, had found himself in a much darker place. Despite the financial success that came with his career, something was missing. His relationship with Sophie, the woman he had left Claire for, had fallen apart. It was the same pattern that had haunted him throughout his life. What he thought he wanted always ended up not being enough. Sophie was no longer a distraction. She had become another reminder of his failure. Michael couldn't ignore it any longer. The emptiness inside him. He had thought that success and wealth would fill the void, but they hadn't. The image he had carefully crafted of himself as a successful businessman, the man who always had it all together, had started to crumble. There were moments like when he walked into his office and looked at his reflection, when he barely recognized the man in the mirror. He felt lost, and nothing seemed to bring him the peace that he had hoped for. It was in this state of unrest that Michael found himself with an unexpected opportunity, an invitation to a charity event in New York City. It was hosted by none other than Claire's foundation. The invitation came through a business contact, a reminder of his past life, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Michael decided to attend. He hadn't seen Claire in years, but the thought of seeing her again stirred something in him. He was no longer the man who had left her. He was someone who had lived with the consequences of his actions. But what was he hoping to achieve by going? Closure? Redemption? He wasn't sure. The night of the event, Michael stood outside the venue watching the guests arrive. He had dressed carefully, putting on his best suit and practicing his smile in the mirror. But as he stood there waiting, the familiar feeling of anxiety began to creep in. He had no idea what he would say to Claire, how she would react to seeing him after all these years. But deep down he knew that this was something he had to do. Something he owed to her. When Michael entered the ballroom, the first thing he saw was Claire. She was standing near the stage talking to a group of donors. Her posture was confident, her presence commanding. There was a quiet strength about her now, something he had never fully appreciated when they were together. Claire was no longer the woman who needed him. She had become someone completely different, someone who had found her own purpose, her own voice. Michael stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her from a distance. He had always admired her grace, her intelligence, and the way she seemed to move through the world with a sense of calm. But tonight there was something different about her. She was no longer the woman who had waited for him to come back, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. She had moved on. Michael felt a pang of regret, but he also felt a strange sense of pride. She had made something of herself. Something meaningful. He didn't want to interrupt her conversation, so he moved to the bar and ordered a drink. As he sipped the whiskey, his mind raced. What was he supposed to say to her? How could he even begin to explain the years of mistakes, the guilt that had weighed on him? The truth was, he wasn't sure if she even wanted to see him. She had built a life without him. And for the first time, Michael realized how much she had truly moved on. Claire eventually made her way across the room, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she spotted Michael standing by the bar, her expression softened. It was a fleeting moment, but Michael caught it. Their eyes met, and for a second, the years between them seemed to disappear. Claire didn't walk toward him immediately. Instead, she took a moment, as if deciding whether or not to approach him. Michael held his breath, waiting for her to make the first move. Finally, Claire walked over to him. Her smile was polite, but there was no warmth in it. No familiarity, just the recognition of two people who had once shared a life but no longer did. "Michael," Claire said, her voice steady. It's been a long time." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, it has." They stood there for a moment, both unsure of what to say next. The small talk felt hollow, as though the words were too small to bridge the gap that had formed between them. Finally, Michael spoke. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did. For what I didn't do." His voice cracked slightly as he said the words. The weight of the apology, of all the things he had never said, seemed to hang in the air between them. Claire's gaze softened, but there was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. "You don't have to apologize, Michael," she said softly. "It's in the past. I've let go of it." Michael swallowed hard. It wasn't what he had expected. Part of him had hoped for some kind of catharsis, a moment where Claire would forgive him or at least acknowledge the pain he had caused. But instead, she had found her peace, long before he had. "You've really built something amazing here," Michael said, gesturing to the event around them. "Your foundation. I'm proud of you, Claire. You've done it. You've turned everything around." Claire smiled, but it wasn't the smile of the woman he had once known. It was the smile of someone who had learned to stand on her own. "Thank you, Michael," she said. "But this isn't about me anymore. It's about all the people we can help now, and the work still left to do." Michael nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. He had lost her, yes, but she had found her way, and in doing so, she had become someone he could never have imagined, someone who had turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, had built a life that was full of meaning. "I'm glad to see you're happy," Michael said quietly. "Really? I am." Claire's smile was small but genuine. "I'm at peace, Michael, and that's enough for me." As they stood there in the midst of the crowd, Michael realized something. He would never be able to undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, this was the moment where he could start moving forward too. It wasn't about reconciliation or redemption. It was about accepting what had happened and finding a way to build something meaningful from the wreckage. With a final nod, Claire turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing there watching her go. But this time, he didn't feel the same emptiness he once had. Instead, he felt something new. Hope. Hope for a future that was his to create. And maybe, for the first time in years, that was enough.